Hello readers, I'm Amy and welcome to Sexual Assault Awareness Month, which is April, hopefully, if I finally get this video filmed and edited on time. I have read a lot of books on sexual assault. It seems to be my favorite niche genre. And I wanted to talk about them, and I wanted to also go through all the books that I haven't read, but my Goodreads didn't have a ton of books on sexual assault that I hadn't read yet, so I asked on Twitter for some recommendations. You guys seriously delivered. Thank you for that. So if you see in this video a book that you recommended, I've read it. If you do not see a book that you've recommended, it will be in my next video. I wrote down all of the recommendations, kept track of them, so this is going to be at least 2 videos, possibly 3 or 4, because I've got a lot of content to discuss. There will be lots of spoilers for the books that I'm mentioning. I'm not going to spoil the endings or the story outcomes or anything, but as Cats and Camera said in their brilliant video last year on trigger warnings are spoilers. And I go into a little bit of detail with some of the trigger warnings because I think you should know what you're getting into whenever you read sexual assault books. Throughout this video, I am going to try and rate each book on a 1 to 10 scale for kind of readability, 10 being the hardest reads and 1 being the easiest and a great introduction into this niche genre. So of course, no sexual assault conversation is complete without some really awesome nonfiction by Roxane Gay. So we are going to start here with Bad Feminist. This was, I believe, one of her first essay collections. It's talking about feminism and how not everyone is a perfect feminist and how feminism can look different according to what you have the ability to do, what you have the time to do, and the energy and resources to take part in. And we are also introduced to her rape and sexual assault experience. She was with a boyfriend, went out into the woods, met up with a bunch of his friends, and it goes on from there. This is definitely on like the 1 to 2 side of the scale. Not that sexual assault is ever easy to read about, but this is a really nice way to ease your way into the genre. There's just 1 or 2 essays that feature it, and the rest are focused on feminism, but Roxane Gay does feel that it's an important story to tell, and I appreciate that. So always, Roxane Gay is just always a really great starting spot. We also have Hunger by Roxane Gay. This one features her rape experience more heavily, particularly in association with her weight, which I really liked. You don't see a lot of narratives that talk about some of the physical outcomes of sexual assault. We get a lot of the mental health and PTSD sexual outcomes where people don't want to have sex or they don't want to communicate or they feel triggered by something. But until Roxane Gay came along, I didn't hear a lot from the physical side of it as far as things such as weight gain or self-harm. And in Roxane's case, she talks a lot about how she just started eating and eating and eating and gaining weight and making herself physically larger in order to protect herself from future sexual assault. It's just really awesome that she's able to bring that into this conversation and that she's willing to talk about it. This I would put more at like a 2 on the scale because of this particular coping skill, I guess, for lack of a better term, that she introduces in this book. But again, Roxane Gay is a pretty easy way to get into the genre if you're interested. And her next nonfiction is Not That Bad. This is also an essay collection, and this is not just Roxane Gay. This is featuring other women as well. Other people who've been sexually assaulted. It's been a while since I've read this, so I don't have too much to say about it, but really great that we're bringing in other voices outside of Roxane Gay. This is specifically a discourse on rape culture, so I'm going to put this at probably a 2 or a 3 on the readability scale. Next nonfiction is also a book that I have recently done a review on. Link in the description down below. And Know My Name, I'm going to put it like a 10. Not because of graphic details, which there are details to what happened, but they're not necessarily super graphic. But this is a memoir about the Brock Turner case, and Chanel Miller was the victim of that. And all of the stuff that she goes through is exhausting. It's a brilliant book, phenomenally written, beautifully told. Chanel Miller is phenomenal. But the book is a lot. We go through, this is what happened the night before. This is what happened that she doesn't even remember because she was blacked out. This is what it felt like when she woke up and no one actually told her what happened. She was very disconnected from the events that occurred. And she's like, okay, yeah, I'll go to court for it if that's what you guys want me to do. And had no idea what she was getting into. Walks you through every single little step of the court process, and it is exhausting and it is infuriating. I did not finish this book. I read most of it until about the last chapter in the victim statement. I did not have it in me to read the victim statement at the time that I was reading this book. The last chapter or two are a lot of wrap up, and at that point I was emotionally exhausted between COVID and Chanel Miller, and I'm like, I cannot finish this book right now. I have no doubt that I'll pick it up eventually and finish that last couple pages. But it's phenomenal, but take care of yourself. Use your self-care. Don't do like I did and try to read this book all in one go. Pace yourself. Definitely pace yourself. This is a 10 because emotions, not because of details. Another nonfiction that I have is very controversial, but it needs to be mentioned because it includes sexual assault and I think it was a decent book. That is Full Disclosure by Stormy Daniels. This is talking, it's really an autobiography more than a memoir. It talks about Stormy Daniels' life from childhood till currently. It talks about what happened with Trump. It talks about her work in porn. It goes through everything in her life, and no matter your feelings on Stormy Daniels and Trump and the events that occurred, I think it was a very well written book. The audiobook, from what I remember, is read by her and she did a really great job. And this book also goes to show that just because you are in sex work does not mean that you cannot be a victim. Sex workers can absolutely be victims just as much as anyone else, and this book really cements that. Like I said, besides that, it's just good writing, and it was a fun life to hear about. I thoroughly enjoyed this book. Full Disclosure, I would put at maybe a 5. She gets pretty graphic with what happened with Trump and everything, but in general, it's more of a fun, lighthearted read. Maybe not for beginners, but certainly for the novice sexual assault reader. For nonfiction, I tend to be a big memoir reader. I don't have a ton of memoir-specific books in this particular list, but one of them that I do have is In Order to Live. This was brilliant. This is by Yeonmi Park. She is a North Korean defector. When I was looking her up at the time, I believe she's living in South Korea. But it discusses her life growing up in North Korea and trying to get across the border to China, and I don't remember if it was like sexual slavery so much, but she ends up, she's forced into relationships with guys, her and her mother both, and I would put In Order to Live probably at like an 8 with the experiences that she deals with both as an immigrant and as a North Korean and as a victim of sexual assault. Just reading this book really got me interested in North Korean stories. It wasn't really a place that I'd gone in my reading before. I really want to read more North Korean stories because I think they're really interesting and I have a lot to learn from them. And besides just great storytelling and a powerful story on its own, the translation for this is really great. I find when I read books from other countries, particularly from Asian countries, so far at least in my reading, the translation is really like you either love it or hate it, and Yeonmi Park's translator did a brilliant job. So if you're looking for a North Korean defector story, if you're looking for a women's sexual assault story, highly recommend. But also take care of yourself. This is something that actually happened. The last nonfiction I have to talk about is Three Women. Three Women was brilliant. It was also different. Like, if you're going to pick up this book, I would recommend just this book. Don't pick up 4 other books at the same time because the prose is definitely different. Not only are some of the chapters in second person, but it just, with the structure and the storytelling, I can't explain it. It's different. I also would recommend a physical or ebook, not an audiobook, at least on your first read through, again, because the prose is just, it brings something new to the table. This was written by Lisa Tudeo, who followed 3 women throughout 8 years of their lives, and one of them is a woman who ended up having a sexual, I believe it was a sexual relationship with a teacher, and we're following that. We're following another woman who's in a polyamorous relationship and another one who's just kind of searching for sexual happiness. So this hits all of the different sexual stories, and it's interesting. I like where it goes. I like that it's like, these women are having sex and they're not ashamed of it, and they come from different places, and we're going to see where that goes. I loved this book. Definitely my favorite nonfiction for last year. Reading, again, I'm going to kind of put this in the middle at a 5. Not just because of the experiences, but again, the writing style is different. It's not the easiest, but that's not to say that it's inaccessible. So for fiction, I want to go ahead and start with some of the classics. First off, we have Tess of the D'Urbervilles. That is, last I checked, how you pronounce it, D'Urberville, for those of you who are struggling as much as I did. It has been a little while since I've read this, but I know there's some sexual assault in there. I think it's mostly marital abuse related. Again, it's been a while since I've read this, but it's a really great classic. It's a fairly easy read considering the writing styles of a lot of classics. It more explores a woman kind of ignoring the abuse that she's going through. Ease of reading, between being a classic and a topic that it discusses, I would probably put it at a 3 or a 4. Not just because of the sexual assault, but I remember one point where her carriage, or her horse, runs into a postman, and it's an unexpectedly gory scene. And then the other classic that we have is, of course, the classic of all classic sexual assault books, and that is Lolita and the pedophilia that takes place in that book. I haven't studied Nabokov by any means, but with what I have learned so far about Vladimir Nabokov and how he has inspired others and the writing that he has done outside of Lolita, and from what I remember a little bit of his life as well, he's not my favorite person, not my favorite author. He writes a lot of pedophilia literature, and I believe he also married someone underage, which kind of the times, but I don't think it was really the times, because wasn't he in the 1900s? Anyways, Lolita, we follow Humbert and his perspective as he chases after his new wife's young daughter. I want to say she's about 12 whenever they meet, and soon start messing around, and it is all from Humbert's perspective. We don't see Lolita's perspective in that at all. We see a lot of justification on Humbert's part. I enjoyed it in that the writing style is pretty distinct to Nabokov. It's kind of flowery without being overdone, but it's also got like that classic writing style to it. So I still enjoyed it, even though the story is not great. It's kind of what I have to say on that. Readability for Lolita, by the way, I would put it like a 5. Like, not just because of the pedophilia, but classic writing styles are very particular to people. On the subject of Lolita, the next book that I want to bring up is Putney. This was recommended to me very recently by a subscriber, and I read it this month, and it reminds me so much of Lolita in its characters and its language. So this is another one that is following an older man, I want to say in his 30s, when he falls for a girl who is at the time 9 when they first meet. They don't get together until she is 12, I think 12 years old. But this one, again, it has a Lolita feel to it in the writing. and in the characters that it depicts, but it next levels Lolita. So we not only have this relationship between an older man and a child, but it's got different timelines as well and different character perspectives, which I know that is not a favorite structure of a lot of people. I happen to love it when I get character and timeline switches, but we are following the Humbert character, the Lolita character, they have different names in Putney, of course, and a friend of the Lolita character who's the only one who really knows that the abuse happened. So in one timeline, we are following each of the characters as they think back to the events that happened when they were younger, and the Lolita character starts to really address what happened and to think about it and to question it. And then we're also following them when they're younger, when you have the man having a relationship with her and what took place and the friends' feelings about the whole thing. And it really shows more of the process of thinking about that abuse and what it meant to the victim and how that meaning changes throughout their life. I really enjoyed this. I think it was well done. I think it was a great conversation. I really liked the writing, and it also had that echo back to Lolita. So if you're going to read Putney, I would also recommend giving Lolita a try because the feel of it is similar, but again, Putney takes it to the next level. Putney, probably put it like a 4, I think. Because there's some description and there's a lot of emotions, and with discussing the feelings around the sexual assault and how those change, those feelings, those emotions can be really tough to read depending on the book, depending on the writing and the author and all of that. Next fiction that we have, I'm actually going to go back to Roxane Gay, and this is Difficult Women. I believe this was completely written by Roxane Gay. Again, it's a series of not essays but short stories, and she's writing short stories on different forms of abuse and the ways women treat themselves and the way that other people treat women. Again, it's been a little while since I've read this book, but Roxane Gay, as usual, I'm going to rate this at like a 1 or a 2 for readability. Really easy introduction into the genre, really fantastic author, really fantastic writing and conversation. I can't say enough good things about Roxane Gay. She's just great all around. Read her, please. Next fiction book that we have is Towelhead. I'm going to tell you right now, this is like a 10. The writing is very good and very accessible, and for all of the trigger warnings that are with this book, I still love it because the author took all of those triggers, all of those terrible events, and made them into a conversation that she constantly has with the audience, and I loved it. I was first introduced to Towelhead through the movie when I was like 14 or 15. It was a lot for me. I would switch back and forth between that movie and a lighter TV channel. I did watch it with my mother, and she afterwards was like, do you have any questions? I was searching for this movie for a while because I didn't know the title of it, but I always was like, what was that one movie that I watched? Finally find it after a couple of years of searching. And even with the internet, like, I'm just that good. And I find out that it was a book first. And so, of course, I have to get the book. And last year, I finally got to read it. And I loved it. And I hated it. And I loved it. We explore pornography and puberty, sexual abuse, physical abuse, verbal abuse, emotional abuse, pedophilia. Race is a huge one in this, as you can probably tell from the title of the book. There's like 1 or 2 redeeming characters in the whole thing. I'm gonna tell you now, as rough of a book as this is, it does have a good ending. Just want you to know. So, like, the ending is worth it if you're willing to go through with it. I do have an individual review on this. All of the books that I have reviews for that I'm gonna talk about, I will go ahead and put in the description down below, because you can only put 5 links in the little I thing, which is kind of annoying, but it is what it is. Then we have a very recent read for me, and that is My Dark Vanessa. My Dark Vanessa has been in the news quite a bit. It was up for the Oprah Book Club, and then it was taken out because of all of the fallout she got over including American Dirt in her Oprah Book Club. A lot of people don't like the ending, which I'm not going to discuss because it's a new book that like just came out in March. Yeah, it came out in March. This is, again, following a teacher and a student, male teacher, female student, different timelines, same perspective. So we are following the timeline of 2000 and the timeline of 2017. In 2000, you see the relationship starting up, mainly the grooming. There's a lot of emphasis on the different grooming that she went through. And in 2017, she's looking back at that and thinking about what it meant to her and still interacting with that teacher. I loved this. Seeing the grooming, seeing the anger that she feels and can't really seem to explain, seeing her think about what happened and the way that she thinks about what happened and the way she thinks of herself as far as victimhood and PTSD. It was a great conversation. I can see why it upsets people, but I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that this book offered a perspective on sexual assault that we really don't get very much, and I loved it for that. Again, link in the description down below. I do have a review for this one that I did recently. My Dark Vanessa, I would probably rate it about a 5 or a 6, mostly because of the emotions that you go through in the book and the discussion around her sexual assault and how she feels about it. So we have what I think is the only series that I'm going to have in any of my videos, and that is the Road to Nowhere series by Meg Ellison. This is my favorite series ever. It is super queer. You've got bisexual, pansexual, trans, polyamory in different forms. So this whole series is following the lives of women after the dystopia, where women die in childbirth and their babies, whenever they're even able to conceive those babies, the babies also die in childbirth. There is a lot of discussion of sexual slavery. In that sexual slavery, there is discussion of rape. There is one instance that I can remember of genital cutting at the beginning of book 2. It's not super graphic, but it's still like, it happened. It was a thing. But the different conversations in these books around these topics are amazing. Book 1 is 100 years before books 2 and 3, so it can actually work as a standalone. However, I do recommend reading it so you have an idea of what book they're referencing in books 2 and 3. And book 1 is following the midwife. I believe she was actually like a nurse or a nurse practitioner in the women's ward. I don't know that it's ever very clear on that, but she goes to the hospital, stocks up on all the birth control she can find, and as she travels in the guise of a man, because it's safer to travel that way, she will pay for some alone time with the sex slaves of those that she meets, and she will take them to a point and be like, all right, here's the birth control, here's some food, who are you, where are you from, how did you get in this situation? And then she will return them to the slavers, which is, that idea is brought up in like later book 2, definitely book 3, where people have different ideas of how to deal with those slaveholders. Some people think like, we'll just let them come and go so that we don't get punished, so that the slaves don't get punished. Other people would rather kill the slavers. There's a lot of different perspectives on that, and I loved it. I have a whole review on this series that I will link down below. But just the sheer exploration of culture in these books and the way these different cultures approach the sex slavery and approach being queer or being straight, and just Meg Ellison did a brilliant job. I highly, highly recommend these books. Readability, I would put it anywhere from a 4 to a 6, really, depending on which book you read. Book 2, I think, was the toughest in terms of content, so I would put that at a 6. Book 1 would be like a 4. Book 5, I think, would be at a 4 or 5. On my readability scale, but definitely a great series. I think it's pretty good for novice readers in the sexual assault genre, so pick it up, definitely. Then we have Speak, which I think was the first sexual assault book that I read, or that I remember reading. sometime in high school. This book is structured in diary entries from a teenager who was raped at a party, and following her as she's just trying to forget about it and move on, but not doing a good job of it. This was turned into a movie, which I think Kristen Stewart actually did a decent job on. I love this book. It's really accessible. The diary entry idea is great. Watching her try and process everything that happened is great. The bullying that she deals with for what happened at the party, for the way that she's changed, is a really interesting angle. I would still put it, though, at like a 4. Not so much for description of what happened as for her PTSD and her fear of her attacker that you really feel throughout this book. That can be a tough part of this book to get through. Of course, I cannot do a sexual assault book video without talking about Handmaid's Tale. Handmaid's Tale is amazing. I have not seen much of the show. I have found I'm a very visual person, which I think is why I struggle with some films and movies. So while I'm really into sexual assault as a niche genre in books, I don't deal with it well in movies at all. So the Handmaid's Tale TV series just really puts me in an emotional place that I don't want to be in, and I've only ever made it about halfway through season 1. I just can't get through that content and take care of myself. But the book, I loved the book. It was actually the first dystopia that I ever read and actually enjoyed. It's what got me interested in dystopia, specifically women's dystopia. This is another interesting one where the sexual assault isn't necessarily thought of as sexual assault. It is and it isn't. Like, you're very aware that the reproductive processes that this dystopian culture is taking part in is rape, is sexual assault, but the society itself doesn't really view it that way. You were taught that you are a woman, you are an object, you do what you were told, we're bringing this new structure and you have 0 rights. And it's not just physical rape, it's the rape of a culture. It's the changing of the world for the male benefit. And it's rape in every way that it can be done, mentally and emotionally and culturally and socially. Just this, Margaret Atwood did a brilliant job with this book. It's been a little while since I've read it. I would probably put it at a 5 or a 6. You don't get a ton of graphic details, but being a dystopias in general are books that I tend to think of as tougher reads, depending on the kind of dystopia and how that dystopia came about and what its effects are on society. For me, they tend to be tougher reads as much as I enjoy them, because they do tend to be very, very dark and very, very depressing. So just be aware of that. Quick little note here, if you hear noise in the background, it seems that every single day I try to film is mow the lawn day for the people that work for the company that we work for. So hopefully I can finish this video before the lawnmowers ruin everything. Next up, Queenie. I loved this book. This book is kind of you love it or you hate it, honestly. A lot of people can't stand the whiny main character. I like it because it brings a mental health aspect to it. So, trigger warning for the very first couple of sentences in the book, Queenie goes through a miscarriage. And throughout this whole book, her work is suffering and her personal life is suffering as she's dealing with these different traumas that she's not really even aware of. She is is it British Jamaican or Jamaican British? I think it's British Jamaican. I might be wrong. But she's from a British Jamaican family, and we see a lot of like Black culture and mental health, and specifically Jamaican culture, and how they're against things like therapy, or at least I think her grandma was the one that argued against it a lot. We see her get into a lot of unhealthy sexual relationships. So while there is not like clear black and white rape, sexual assault situation in this, one of the relationships in particular, which all of the sexual stuff in this book is pretty graphic. One of them is like BDSM based, and she's not really into it, but she's doing it anyways to make the guy happy. And she goes to the gynecologist afterwards, and they're just like, "Are you okay? Because your is not okay. Are you sure that you're okay? That you're in a healthy relationship? You don't need help? You're good?" Huh? So this is a tough read. I would put this probably at a 7 or an 8, largely because of the graphic detail that is involved in this. There's that lawnmower. I've only got a couple more books. I can do this. Next up, we have The Interrupting Cat, who always knocks on the door whenever it's closed. Stop struggling. You wanted to come in here. Next up, we have Beartown by Frederick Bachman. This is my favorite book of his. This is... Go away! This is about the star player of the hockey team in this small town raping the hockey team general manager's daughter. And this isn't just about that situation that happened. It doesn't happen until like over halfway through the book. But what you're really seeing is a ton of characters and their perspectives and their roles in this small town. And you're really getting a feel for the culture and the society of this small town and how they are affected by each other and how they are ultimately affected by the event of the rape. This does have a sequel, Us Against You, and I believe there's going to be a third book in this series. I loved it. It might not be your thing if you struggle to keep track of characters. Personally, I listened to this as an audiobook, but I would definitely recommend it as a physical or ebook because with the sheer number of characters, I just struggle to keep track of information like that whenever I'm listening to an audiobook. But that's just me. Little tip. Readability, I would put it like a 3 or... I'd put it at a 3. Lots of characters, and there is sexual assault, and people don't deal with it well. But it's not super graphic. Frederick Bachman does an amazing job of discussing this topic, so highly recommend. Definitely more... It's got a lot going on, but it is more beginner, novice friendly. Then we have The Water Cure. This one I have a lot of mixed feelings on. Again, review linked in the description below. I don't love the particular feminist politics of this book. It is pretty, I would say, social justice warrior in that it's very much against men. But I still enjoyed the story, even though I'm not that kind of feminist. And the sexual assault is not the main point of the story. It's more something that you become aware of in the book, and it is revolving around incest. I would put this at probably a 4 or a 5. Again, this is one that I'm not rating higher because of the sexual assault involved, which you don't really see and isn't discussed all that much, but it's there. But also this book is taking place in a cult, and you've got this water cure that's supposed to heal everyone, and just the way the feminism is structured in it and the discussion of women and their bodies and everything, I'd like say this is a slightly more difficult book. And it's one that I think a lot of people don't love, but I still think it's interesting and it's worth a read, and I enjoy it as a story, even if I don't totally agree with everything that it talks about. Another recent read on this list for this year, when did I read this? February, is, I almost said Precious, Push by Sapphire. Also known as Precious. Whenever it became a movie, it was renamed Precious, and the book cover that I have, or that I borrowed from a friend, it's the one that I'm showing on the screen. Precious is bigger than Push, so you don't really know like which title they're going for. But Precious is exploring, or Push is exploring, the life of a large woman who has dealt with a lot of incest and molestation, has a baby by her father. Can't remember if it was biological or step or what. I want to say it was biological. And then is pregnant again, really not super well educated. She ends up getting into a class to work up to getting her GED. This I am going to put at like a 10. really. It's graphic. It's a tough read with everything that she goes through. And something else to be aware of that some readers are going to struggle with is the language. It's using Ebonics. I think the other term for that is African American vernacular English, if I remember correctly. So the language can be kind of tough for people to get into. If you are into reading this, it's one of those books that I would suggest read just this book, only this book. Don't be like me and read 5 books at once, because this is a book, to get into the writing, you might just have to focus only on this reading. If you're up for it, I think it's worth it. I thought the book was brilliantly written and heartbreaking, and I had a lot to learn from it. But again, it's like a 10 because it's definitely a tough read. I have Identical by Ellen Hopkins. This is actually my favorite book of hers. She does a lot of books on sex and drugs and body image, and it's kind of a poetry prose. I count it as reading poetry because I don't read a lot of poetry, so this is my version of poetry. Wonderful books. Identical is... I loved it. I will tell you the initial premise. It's not exactly as I say it because stuff happens and it's great. But essentially, this book is about a pair of twins, one of whom is having a sexual relationship with their father and one who is not, and who is jealous of that relationship, not because of the sexuality of it, but because of the closeness of that relationship. One sister is very sexual and sleeping around with guys as kind of a coping skill, and one is not. And you're following these 2 different perspectives throughout the book, and stuff happens, and it was brilliant, and I loved it, and I should probably get my own copy of this book so I can just reread it 1,000 times every year. I would probably put it at like an 8 because of the stuff that happens. Ellen Hopkins is great. I love that she's accessible to both younger and older crowds, whoever's reading YA. Like, she's a very accessible writer, but she writes some really tough topics. A book that I finished in April, again, I read a lot of sexual assault books recently. What Was She Thinking? Notes on a Scandal. This I would put at like a 1. It is one of the only books that I've read or that I know of that has a male victim and a female perpetrator. This book is following a female teacher and a male student who get in a relationship together. And I rate this at a 1 because of the way that the story is told, and I will go so far as to say that this book is humorous. As humorous as a sexual assault story could possibly be, which is not very, but the perspective on it was just really good. You have in the audiobook this older British woman telling the story, and she's really great with putting on that face of our main character. I don't remember the main character's name, but she is a friend of the female teacher who is having the relationship with the male student, and she's a friend. Like, she is jealous. She thinks of herself as better than everyone else. Just her view on the situation and on the other woman and on her co-workers, because she's also a teacher in the same school, just really lent a lightheartedness to the story and made it fun. And it's definitely great if you were trying to ease your way into the genre because of that perspective. Not my favorite sexual assault book by any means, because I tend to go for the heavier stuff, but great introduction. Again, I'd rate this at like a 1. Then we have Jodi Picoult. I have not read her in several years, but I still have a good collection of her right here. Perfect Match was one that I probably read late high school, early college years. And this is also one that has a male victim. This is following a priest or a pastor who is accused of sexually assaulting a 5-year-old boy, either molesting or assaulting. It's been years since I've read it. But Jodi Picoult, as usual, does a phenomenal job. Her books tend toward, well, she does a lot of topics, but she does like family dramas. My favorite niche of hers in the family dramas are the medical stories. I think she does a great job with those. And Perfect Match goes more into child trauma psychology, which was really interesting. And I love her writing. I love her character building. This is a book that you'll have to watch out for if you're picky on book structure, because this is one that bounces back and forth between several characters throughout the book. Again, that is a structure for a book that I absolutely love, but it's not for everybody. Jodi Picoult books, I'm probably going to put this at like a 6 because the age of the character, the events that happen. This is a book that goes through court cases. Jodi Picoult tends to have court cases in her books. Again, I think that she makes them so interesting. I love her. I need to pick up one of her books again because it's been a while and she was always one of my favorites. Now we have the only book I think that I've read with an intersex character and sexual assault. I will say Abigail Tartland, the author of this book, is, as far as I know, not an Own Voices author for an intersex character, but this is one of those times when I give the authors slack. Mostly because we see very, very, very few intersex narratives ever. I am trying to get a lot of books under my belt that feature intersex characters, no matter who they're written by, just so that I can have a knowledge of the books that feature them to recommend to others, because they're just not out there. So until we do start getting more Own Voices authors, I think it's fine to write an intersex character if you are not intersex, because we don't have the material out there. We don't have those stories being written. And Golden Boy, I'm going to put it a 10. Again, this is actually another young adult book. I'm going to tell you right now, there is abortion, there is suicide, there is very detailed rape scene, there is problems with the family and how they're dealing with the character's intersexual nature. And I can also say, if you don't want to read the rape scene, which I recommend that you don't, because even for me, who reads a lot of hard-hitting sexual assault books, it was rough. You can skip the entire first chapter in which it happens, and you will not have missed out on any information. You can skip the first chapter, still get through the rest of the book, and not have missed anything. So if you are interested in reading this, I recommend skipping chapter 1, because it is a rough go. Then we have one of my favorite sexual assault fictions, based on a nonfiction, also Own Voices, and that is Women Talking by Miriam Toews. Yes, I said Toews. I had to watch a video by The Poptimist to realize that in my review of this book, I said it wrong, because I kept saying Miriam Toews, but it's Miriam Toews. Miriam Toews was raised Mennonite herself. She is not currently Mennonite. She has left the Mennonite lifestyle. But here she writes a book based on a true event about a Mennonite colony in which the women are repeatedly raped at night after being drugged. They find out that it was the men. The men get sent off in this book. I don't remember how the real story differed from the fiction one as far as the men's location, but it does give a synopsis of the actual event before you read the book. So all of these women have gathered in the barn together to talk about whether or not they're going to leave the colony and their reasons for it. Something to note is that Mennonites are pacifists, and these Mennonite women, some of them have murderous thoughts because they're very upset by what their husbands and sons and fathers and cousins did to them. And they have to think, like, what do these murderous thoughts mean for me and for my future in this colony? How can I deal with those murderous thoughts and still practice my pacifism? There are some really amazing conversations going on in this book. I will say this book is not for everyone. It is fairly short, but it is very dialogue heavy and not very action heavy. And normally, I don't think this is a book that I would like because of how dialogue heavy it is. But I adored it, and I can't wait to read it again. Definitely recommend Again, own voices, based on a true story, great conversation. I like the pacifist angle and all of the different conversations and viewpoints that are told in this story to come to their ultimate decision of whether or not they're leaving the colony. I love this book. So dear to my heart. Readability, I'm going to put it a 5. As 5's going to be kind of my like undecided number. You hear stuff about what happened, you're seeing the emotions behind what happened. The dialogue style won't be for everyone, but that said, I do find it very readable. Then Stephen King worms his way into every genre, and here we have Stephen King's Gerald's Game, which is one of my top favorite books of his, and I think one of his really underrated books. This is following a woman who goes off for the weekend with her husband. Her husband is very into rape fantasies, where he will pretend to force himself onto his wife. So I'm not going to get into that discussion here because that is a long and complicated topic. But essentially, things go wrong. Husband doesn't listen to wife whenever she tells him to stop. Husband ends up having a heart attack and dying, and she is handcuffed to the bed, as in police-grade handcuffs that she doesn't have the key for. And this is one of the more brilliant moments in writing in general, and Stephen King in particular, where he writes this whole story with one character. There are a couple of side characters here and there who pop in, like the husband at the beginning of the book and her family in snippets of her memory throughout the book, but essentially this book is about one person and it features one person, and that takes a lot of talent, especially to get the length that you have in this book. Definitely like a 10 because of the graphic stuff towards the end of the book, because of the discussion of molestation and incest throughout the book and the PTSD that she deals with. And it's Stephen King. He's going to be a little gory. He's going to be a little graphic. He's going to be a little traumatizing. So I'm going to rate this at like a 10. But again, it is one of his most underrated books that I have read so far. And just talking about it actually makes me really want to pick it up again. Next is another YA book, pretty classic YA book at this point, and that is The Lovely Bones. I read this back in high school, I think. I'm going to put this at probably a 7 or an 8, more because of emotional factors, although there is some... The sexual assault itself, I don't remember it being a graphic event, but it is a very emotional event. You have this girl, I don't remember if she's walking through a field or across a road or something, but she's called into the home of this guy who rapes her and kills her, and then the rest of the book is her in what's that middle level? Purgatory or something? And she's looking down on the events that follow. And I hated this book, honestly. A lot of it was because it wasn't the most satisfying book. For a sexual assault book, it's not a satisfying read, but in my adulthood, while I don't know that I would read it again because I don't get into a lot of YA, I think in my adulthood, I would appreciate it a lot more than I did as a kid, because now I can appreciate those nuances in the sexual assault stories. They're not all going to end well. In fact, most of them are not going to end well. And I didn't appreciate that as a kid whenever I read this book. But looking back at it now, I love that we got that alternate perspective. And I love that it wasn't satisfying, because most of them just don't go well, and I think that's realistic. Alright, we are finally on the last book for the red books. I still have a video or two to do after this. And that is On Chesil Beach. This has a little asterisk on it, next to it on my list, because On Chesil Beach is not a book about sexual assault. However, I think it goes very well into this sexual trauma conversation. On Chesil Beach is about a honeymooning couple. Most of the book takes place over the 2 days and 1 night surrounding their honeymoon, and the last couple of pages take over the next couple of years to give you an overview of what has happened in their relationship. You have the husband who is stereotypically excited for his honeymoon night. He gets to have sex with someone that he loves. It's exciting. He can't wait. He's nervous about performance, but like it's finally gonna happen. And then you have the wife who is terrified. From what I remember, it's been a couple years since I've read this. I really need to read it again because it was really, really good by Mr. Ian McEwan and his lovely writing style. From what I remember, this is one of those stories where she's brought up in a household that sex isn't really talked about, and it's pounded into her that you wait until marriage to lose your virginity. I have a lot of problems with that concept, but we'll just stick with the story topic here and say that that is a lot of pressure for her. So she's going into her honeymoon scared of what's gonna happen. And this is also one of those books that uses the non-communication trope, which usually annoys me and I'm usually not super into, but this book does it really well because it's not just that they're not communicating with one another, it's that they've been trained not to communicate with one another in the times that they're being raised in. She is afraid of sex, and that's affecting her feelings on this, and it's going to affect her wedding night, and you're going to watch what happens throughout this book. There might be some sexual assault in her past. Now that I'm trying to think about it, I really should have read some of these more recently before talking about them. But anyways, while I don't remember it dealing with sexual assault, I think it fits really well into this video as a sexual trauma topic discussion. Just read it. It's great. Difficulty of reading, I would put it like a 2 or a 3. So pretty beginner friendly. I hope that I remembered everything and didn't skip anything on my list. Please like, subscribe, be my friend on social media. Keep an eye out for the next video, which will hopefully be up before May 1st, but no promises, because depression stuff and work stuff and life stuff really just gets me. That is it. So, hope you all enjoyed the video. Let me know your thoughts down below, and let me know if you have any other book recommendations that I need to add to future lists and possibly future videos. Bye, friends.